So maybe we can just, if we start at the beginning, right? Like you were here, you had a great career. I mean, obviously from IIT Kanpur, then you were leading a bunch of very high quality engineering teams. Now, a lot of us gets very cozy, right? In those nice jobs, nice career growth. What really drives you to start a business, right? It's not easy. It's what kind of goes in your mind for people out here who's thinking about it?
Yeah, I think, it's, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. I know the most precious thing you can invest in is time, more than money. So I really appreciate you folks being here. So there's a paradox. My name means patience, by the way. For those of you who don't know, Dheeraj in Hindi means patience. But the thing that really drove me to start this company was impatience. It's like, what does it mean to really take this fire in the belly that, basically says, take some risks and do something different, and maybe you can do this better. And that basically was the genesis of starting this company. I had a little bit of a knack for art as well, so there was this right brain of me, which was like, and I had kind of seen it in various forms of life, and I'm like, there's something here. I was pretty gregarious, and I was good with people. So, there was this love for computer science and software and systems, and organization building was actually a passion. Building relationships, and finally this thing that I was beginning to, and I think this Apple iPhone thing actually just stoked a lot of that fire to say, look, I think I know what to appreciate about elegance and ease of use and things like that. So 2007 was the time when these things were actually coming, and obviously I think by 2009 when the recession hit, as my previous startup was actually being, in fact, Nitin is here. He took over from me when I left Aster. But I think as that company was going through its sort of next phase, I think the impatience grew further and said, let's quit and start something actually.
Great. So I can appreciate this because I have a very tech background as well, so from the engineering side. So what goes on your mind as you are kind of getting on this journey being a tech founder, right? Like you have the tech background. Do you know from then that you can be the CEO, you can take the company forward on the business side? What gets you that confidence?
Well, tech to me was a means to an end, and I enjoyed it. I wanted to be good at what I was doing. So back when I had a fork in the road, I said I could do physics, I could do computer science. I took to computer science, and then while I was doing computer science, I'm like, I want to get into economics and do a PhD in economics. So my mind was all over the place, actually. And I think finally I said, look, I'll probably come and pursue a PhD here. And when I came to my first internship, I'm like, I need to be in the industry. This is 1998. So I'd come to the US in 97. My first summer was 98. And I was just willing to get into the industry. And obviously 99, 2000, 2001, those 5 years were pretty formative for me because I had seen the worst of the first bubble burst, and I had just tenaciously plowed through that startup to learn a lot about what it means to build a company. By the way, I should be somewhat more equi-faced both ways. Otherwise, I'm a little bit more this way and ignoring this other side. I think it was
I'll do the same.
That
symmetry, yeah.
Customer-centric, actually.
Exactly.
So having plowed through all that, it was, and we had, I just got married in 2000, and my wife and I were equal risk takers in many of these things. So having gone through one of the worst bubble bursts, it just gave me more courage, and then obviously I cooled down a little bit when I went to Oracle for 4.5 years, but learned a lot about shipping code to 100,000 customers and such. And I think that's one of the rare things. You work for startups, but you also go and ship code for the large enterprises. It gives you how to balance the paradox of moving fast and breaking things, but also knowing how not to break things.
Yeah.
Actually, And I think by the time I came to Aster, it was a good amalgam of both small companies and large companies. And then this recession hits, and you get more impatient and you go start companies. Being a CEO, I think it was more of a moniker, but I knew that I read a lot, so I read about politics and news and everything else. History is my big thing, so learn a lot from history.
By the way, I tried to get in my high school, try to combine science and history, and they would never do that. Like they just said you have to get out of this school to combine that. So I.
And I was also, this idea of understanding people and all that stuff. So in general, I think I knew that at the core I was a technologist, I was a product guy, and I build things. But then building organizations, passionate about process and systems, whether it's people, process, product. So how do you really do not just product but people and process as well?
Correct.
And get the appreciation for people and process. Over time, I just started getting more and more, I would say, expansive, and
You start to get the feel of it probably in a little while. You talked about, thank you for that. You talked about in one of the prior notes about product, going back people, product, process. You talked about the design first principle, which I believe is a very important principle because you have to, that's the foundation of a large company. Talk to us about how do you think about that when you start a company?
In fact, great point about, and it's not just design of the product, you have to design process as well. Now we have almost 3,000 people in sales, and it's not easy. They're in 50 countries. We're trying to add 1,000 customers a quarter. There's a lot of math in sales, I can tell you that. There's a lot of math in sales. And it's all about design. And there's a lot of math in marketing. If anything, sometimes our board is like, you guys are getting too, just focused on demand generation and funnel science as opposed to your brand and things like that. And it's a paradox because, you got to go get business for this quarter, which is all the math of the funnel. And then you got to figure out how to really win the hearts and minds of people for the future so that you can get the eyeballs at the top of the funnel, actually. So I think there's so much design in pretty much everything. Even the process piece of how do you, we have levers that are so sensitive now. 1% of discount is 5% more growth for us, less or more.
Interesting.
So that's the level because, it's every quarter we are quoting $3 billion worth of product. So what does it mean? 1% is imagine what that means to design. So I think, we have to design a lot in various things. And as a company in 10 years, we just finished 10 years 5 days ago.
Congrats.
Thank you. And still feels like it's nothing. We are nothing. We are nothing. This looks like, another phase of design. So we have to go and make a lot more things more efficient, more efficacious. And it's an operating system. Just like for those of you who build software, you realize, you build something for a certain workload, and then you're like, well, there's more workloads and even more workloads. But Harjot is here. He is another mutant. And he knows many of these things that I'm talking about right now. There's design in where you acquire companies and try to fit them and integrate them as well, and it's not easy. You can ask him about how difficult it's been to integrate people and integrate products, and because eventually, you're trying to reduce friction for the customer, and in the process, you have to take friction with people within, and it's really hard.
Yeah. By the way, we were just going to back him, and you scooped him up before we could write the Series A term sheet. Congrats, Harjot, by the way. So let's kind of maybe switch gears and talk about scaling, right? You started the company, and then when did the first, in terms of product market fit, what gives you that confidence that, yes, this is working, now we need to make the design better and more?
Well, a big part of this is your existing customers and if they're doing repeat business with you. And how do you really make them into your investors? Because these days I have this thing that says investors are customers, so go and deal with your product, which is your stock price and your ticker, because they're buying a product. But customers are investors because we take every dollar that we actually get from them and invest it back into the business. And that's been a thesis for the last 10 years for this business, is how do you take every dollar back and do more products and sales and marketing and things like that. So, how do you look at your customers and investors? And how does each one of these customers, how do they actually continue to buy from you? And how do you not look at like, hey, it's okay if you lost that. I think is at the core of really going and doubling down on your business. We were very slow in the first 3 years of hiring people. By April of 2013, we were like 150 people because we still didn't know that, our thing had actually gone to the certain point where we can crank it up. And then by April 2018, we were like 3,500 people.
Oh, wow.
And now we are like 6,000 people. So I think you need to start slow as well, where you know that your existing customers are willing to pay you more. And there's a bit of a gut. I mean, you can't learn gut. This is part of who you are, where you start to realize that, look, this thing will work.
Do you kind of keep the burn low to a certain extent in the manageable realm before you know that the product market fit?
Yeah. And by definition, if you're not hiring at this pace,
exactly.
you will have to keep the burn low. And then we also did a good job of distributing our development sort of organization in 2013 when we were still early. If we had started to do something now, it would have looked like a foreign body that would have been rejected. Actually, people would not have taken to it. So this idea of a distributed developer force actually helped us also save some money along the way as well, and also get great talent from outside the Bay Area. I mean, I read a lot about Uber these days, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of entitlement in the Bay Area actually. Just the fact the coffee machine has changed, I'm like, wow. There are parts of the world where they don't even care about many of these things. So I think it was good to have diversified. And then now almost half our developer workforce is in the West Coast, but then the other half is in Durham, in Berlin, in Cambridge, in Belgrade, and Bangalore, and
Oh,
Pune.
wow.
So we have like 8 or 9 centers outside.
These are not sales offices, these are
development,
engineering.
Development, actually. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, if I go back to, this is, again, I learned about this by reading up, but there was a time in Nutanix's history when you were really up against the wall, right? And you had to decide what to do. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that. You talked about anti-fragile. Talk to us about that incident.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just one. There were like 2 or 3 which could have almost killed the company. And I think this idea of continuing to go through all these sort of dark moments of the company, and one of them happened to be from VMware. This was in 2013 timeframe when they wanted to get into the space of data, and because obviously compute was almost fully mature for them, and it was a flat market. They were not really growing in compute because they had oversold compute over the course of the last 10 years before that. And we were just an app on VMware, the platform. They were the platform. We were just building a couple of apps, and we couldn't survive without them. Mm-hmm. But we'd also been very clever from day one to design something that was not attached to just one platform. We said, look, we've got to have an architecture that is portable, that runs on other platforms just as much. And one of our customers just 6-9 months before that had pushed us. It was one of the largest customers back then. Said, look, I'm going to pay you only if you port this to open source platform. And I think that became a serendipity for the company because we had ported ourselves to this open source platform. And VMware basically had said, look, I don't think you guys deserve to live. And this is when we were nothing. We were doing probably $5 million or $8 million a quarter or something, And we pushed the corner and we said, we got to really take this head on, because if you don't own our stack, we'll be dead in no time, actually. And this is when we co-opted open source and we made it our own hypervisor, virtualization software platform and such. What Red Hat couldn't do is what we were able to actually go and do. And it gave us this real flexibility. It's like, people talk about, like, if Israel didn't have access to the sea, ocean, there'd probably be a very different country.
Yep.
So this owning the platform was like having access to the ocean, actually. You could basically go and protect yourself.
You had to create your own hypervisor, right?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously got the early seeds from open source.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that we had to do on top of it to really make it such that it was enterprise grade. I mean, today it's almost half our business. And at the same time, we have to be respectful to those who want to use VMware. And we go to our customers, we talk about platform and apps. We're like, look, you don't trust us, try our apps on top of VMware, the platform. And then over time, when you trust us, we'll come and sell you the platform. That's the same strategy we're using with public cloud. You're saying, look, you have the platform, you have your billing and accounting and all that stuff, identity with public cloud, you'd still need our app. And that app will help you do a lot of legacy workloads to run in the public cloud, because otherwise the architecture is not cloud native for most people.
So how do you, double clicking on that, right? These are these darkest days, as you said, are the defining moments of a company, right? How do you motivate your lieutenants and the ranks and file soldiers, right, to march again? Maybe capital might also not be available, by the way. If something like this kind of a tectonic shift happens in the company, we VCs don't run with money and back these companies. These are the times when the true character of a company really comes out. How do you really rally forces around yourself?
Well, one is humor. You need to really have levity in the company, because otherwise it gets too serious. Imagine building a business is hard enough and you're making it harder by just having a lot of head and no heart, and So I think culture is really, and I know I'm saying something that's a truism, but it comes down to how do you build organizations and how do you really think about building a mission, because we're really up against everything. Everybody's telling you don't deserve to live. You don't deserve to survive. You'll be acquired. Every year it was said about us. And how do you really build a culture where people are willing to, come and celebrate autonomy and, have a sense of purpose. I'm a big fan of Dan Pink, by the way, as you can see. And you have to pay them quite a bit as well. So once you take money off the table, people are willing to look at the mission. And we used to have a lot of fun. We had to make some tough calls on culture along the way. When we realized that it wouldn't grow and scale the business, we wouldn't have enough leaders.
Did you have to lay people off?
No, we never laid people off, but we had to fire people. We had to fire people. We had to let people go. I'm talking about individuals, and this was to really say, how do we really grow this into a larger company and have more leaders emerge who think about autonomy and really are passionate about mastery and purpose. And even today we have to we don't fire people, but we actually decide that for the sake of culture, it's okay to lose some people actually, because at the end of the day, we have, as I said, 2,000 people in engineering now. There's friction, and it's not easy. Harjot will tell you about.
You're singing your praises.
But and those things, at some point you have to take the short-term pain for the long-term gains. Actually, it's true for everything you folks are doing when you quit your jobs, for cushy things that you have, where salary comes every 2 weeks to wow, I've got to leave everything and do something which is completely uncertain.
Yeah.
And that's true for a lot of organizational decisions you got to make as well. Actually.
Great. So let's switch gears to the public market side, right? Now, the company was growing rapidly. Now, a lot of other folks would also think about M&A, right? Public market is obviously a great option, but not the only option. How did you think about that? Because when you expose yourself to public market, there's a lot more rigor, as you talked about, all the processes maybe needs to rebuild. How did you make that decision? What was going on in your mind?
So, I think, I have this imagery in my head about making decisions. And many a time, the parliament is confused, like it was with, how many of you have seen Darkest Hour? It's one of my favorite movies, actually. All of you should watch The Darkest Hour. It's probably one of the best movies that I've ever seen. And then, how many of you have seen The Post? The Post? Two of my, again, favorite movies about decision making.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to make decisions, So Darkest Hour, the real sort of moment in the movie is when he's confused, and Churchill is confused, and he's like, where do I get my answers from? And he says, I got to really just get out of the car. He goes into the London tube, and then people give him the clarity. It's the masses that give him the clarity of what does it mean to really do this against the Germans back in the day because everybody thought he's just crazy, actually. So to answer your question, it's the customers and the employees who make a lot of these decisions. Because the Senate never has the real pulse. It's the employees and the customers who have the real pulse.
How so? How would you make that
See,
kind of a
because,
decision?
Whatever you're doing, you can't just do it with your bravado, right? It's the people behind it. And the people, I mean customers, I mean employees. Without them, you're nothing. So if they're like, let's keep going because this is nothing, whatever little thing that we've achieved and any highs and lows, So when I travel, when I talk to employees, it's them who are saying, keep going. Don't get acquired by anyone. Now, if this said, look, you guys have had a bad experience with me and the product is suffering and the customer support is suffering and things of that nature, then I think it would be much easier to make a decision. So you take a lot of that energy and you just say, look, I think you got to listen to these people. And if you can't create a great environment for them to go do something big, I mean, now we are thinking next 10 years. Now, whether or not we'll survive and thrive is a question of, it's like 2010 back again. But from what I hear from the people in, who are closer to the, I would say, where the action is happening, they're saying keep going. And
Great.
I mean, for a lot of these people, look, they've seen some money, but they're like, look, if you want to make it 10x bigger, we've got to take some more risks. This is what the problem with, most entrepreneurs is like, when you believe that you have a lot to lose, you stop taking risks. I mean, this transition that we're going through, the business model transition, is one of the biggest headaches that you could actually embrace. Like, well, things are going well, the stock is at $60, and like, no, we got to go and do the subscription change. And all of a sudden, the math of the business comes back. You're like, well, what does top line mean? What is 3-year terms, 1-year terms, and all this stuff? And it confuses the heck out of operators and investors and everybody. But if we hadn't done this, we probably would never be a hybrid cloud company. So we couldn't postpone the inevitable if we didn't do this. And for a lot of people, like, well, just it's too complex, sell it off. And for us, it was like, well, if the customers and the employees are saying it's the right thing to do, let's go and do it.
It's great. By the way, we'll open up in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to ask you in terms of, on a personal note, right? Is it different being a public market company CEO versus a private CEO? Is it more stressful? If so, how do you manage the stress? How do you kind of, what's your mantra in leading a public company?
It has to be simple, and the simple answer is breathing. I can't tell you enough about the value of just more oxygen in the brain is important. And and beyond just the levity, I think in meetings, making decisions, sleeping and breathing. You have to sleep well. You have to breathe well. Breathing. I mean, for those of you who actually, how many of you here respect breath meditation? Like anybody here? See,
Wow.
It's a big crowd.
Yeah,
actually.
you got that.
And the reasons are simple, and this is 2008, before I'd started the company. I used to have a long commute from San Ramon to Redwood City. So I would listen to Michael Krasny on the forum, KQED. And he had brought this really good guest speaker. His name was Paul Ekman. Anybody here know Paul Ekman? He's a really good, well, obviously, he's a great psychologist who basically has done a ton of research on many things, including lying and, breathing and things like that. So he had just come back after meeting Dalai Lama and spent tens of days with him talking about, authenticity and things like that. So he was talking about this thing, and the one sentence that struck me hard is like, look, the most automatic behavior in our lives is breathing. If you can learn to control that, you can learn to control a lot of things in life, especially your impulses and your automatic behaviors, which are beyond breathing. So that struck me like, wow, that's a fundamental. I mean, imagine to a nerd, you give me a logic like that. I'm like, I'm going to figure out what it means to really learn to breathe. And I think and it's a thing that you can actually subsume in your daily life when you're even sitting in meetings. Because the thing that we all want, as we all know, is like instant stuff. Like, why is this presentation taking so long when the answer is right there and stuff like that? So you just pause and you breathe and you come back and you're like, well, how do I really balance results with the process of this employee actually growing in their confidence? Because they'll go through 10 slides, you know the answer is in the 11th slide. But you have to go through the 10 in some ways, actually, And it tests you. So I think breathing helps. Sleeping helps a lot as well.
Jyot, notice his breathing next time you're presenting.
But sleeping helps a lot as well. So I don't know if you folks actually, there's a really good book called Why We Sleep. Anybody here read Why We Sleep? Great read, by the way. And we got the author. We got ton of authors of these really good books to come and speak to us, like Radical Candor. Anybody here read Radical Candor? Another really good book. So we just bring Deepak Malhotra and Kim Scott and this author of Why We Sleep and many other, like Brené Brown. I've written a couple of pages for Brené Brown actually on vulnerability. What does it mean to be vulnerable and stuff like that. So yeah, these things actually help. Reading books helps a lot as well actually. So and as a company we read a lot.
That's great. That's the formula, it looks like, for wealth creation. Getting great speakers in there. Awesome. So I'll open up, maybe if there are questions from the audience. So the question is, as a founder, how did you think about continuing as a CEO of a public company? And then as a technical founder, how was your thoughts around the CEO? Is that the right?
Well, I think, if you try to apply the product and market analogies, we are all just products in a market, and there's a product market fit or not. Over time, that's true for even products. You apply new workloads and products fail. They're not built to scale, they don't perform. Many of these things actually happen to products. So how you constantly evolve the product for the changing needs of the market is what defines your longevity. Like, I'm not here to say that I'm here forever, because tomorrow the product could be, like, I could just be in a stasis and the market has changed because now there's massively different investors, not growth investors, but value investors. Recession comes, there's a new workload, new pressure. How do I make decisions on those things? So at the end of the day, you have to look at it like a product market fit. And the market is never constant. It's constantly evolving. So you have to be ahead of the market. And that's the only way products survive. And this notion of technical versus whatever, I think it's just a moniker. People come from physics backgrounds and biology backgrounds and chemistry backgrounds and psychology backgrounds and library sciences backgrounds and CS backgrounds. Yeah, that's just a means to an end. Eventually, you want to really understand people, understand products, understand processes. You need to be good at looking around the corner, better than others. You need to be optimistic, you need to be paranoid at the same time. If you were to say one virtue of a CEO, schizophrenia. Right? You have to be paranoid and you have to be optimistic. And how do you weave that into every hour of every, because you have to think like that, and that's the only way. In fact, there's a lot of research in leadership that just says the biggest test is balancing the paradoxes. Because you'll always, and the bigger the stakes become, the higher the tightrope goes, and you have to walk a tightrope. You lean too much towards one side, you're done. Whether it's this side or that side, actually. So that imagery, you should keep in mind, actually. It's paradoxes.
How different is it to work with the board before and after IPO?
So many things remain constant. Not the least of which is how authentic you are with the board and how you're not in this mode of us versus them. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs basically create this when they're sitting on the opposite sides of the table. And figuratively, you have to figure out a way to sit on the same side of the table. And by the way, it works when you negotiate, and the Japanese know this really well. When you negotiate, you would sit on the same side of the table. And Brené talks about this in her book, that when you sit on the same side of the table, and when you pull something towards you, the problem is both of yours. When you push something away from you, the problem is neither of yours. When you sit on opposite sides of the table, it becomes either. So, I mean, it kind of keeps you in the perspective of like, what does it mean to have the board sit on your side of the table? And that has to remain all the time. That is not to say that they will not act like product managers. Like, what's the product? The product is the business. In this case, there's a new capability of an investor who's sitting out there in the public markets and saying, I need better quality. Like, this is what's happening right now. They're like, oh, you guys have built products for great performance, but where is the reliability every quarter by the quarter? Because that's what they're looking for. They're saying, great performance is awesome. You built a NASCAR for the race, but I want something that I can take my family in on these streets, actually. So reliability is important, consistency is important. And those are all the features that the investor customer is asking for, that the board members act like product managers for, And it's not much different even as a private company. I mean, yeah, I guess you see more of the, being in the arena in the public markets because you're changing value every day. It gets tougher from the point of view of being in a coliseum all of a sudden. And you're the gladiator in some sense, and the people out there are like, death to this gladiator and stuff like that. It happens a lot. But you just breathe well, That's how you actually take care of the coliseum, actually. Because, yeah, you are in a much larger coliseum. Because the people in the bleachers, they have no idea of the arena. All they want to do is throw more money at whether the lion wins or the gladiator, actually. And I mean, I think there's obviously, look, nothing is for free. Going public is not a free thing, but it gives you the ability to think about, like, what does it mean to be in a marathon of sprints? Because every quarter is a sprint. So it really tightens up the science of the business, the math of the business, the design of the business. And we are barely done. I think, in the first 10 years, we crammed a lot, including not just product and Main Street and thinking about Main Street and their needs, but I think what Wall Street really asks for is give me a product that's reliable, consistent, and obviously high performance if you can give me. Otherwise, if you can't give me performance, just give me cash. Right?
But just to double click on Omri's point, though, before IPO, you have your board, but after IPO, even people who are not on your board can accumulate a bunch of shares and become activist shareholder, right? Do you need to pay attention to even people outside your board as investors?
I mean, you need to look. I mean, I shouldn't say that the dual class is any kind of a bulwark against this stuff. It gives you a little bit of sort of defense, which we do, but at the end of the day, you just have to look at them as a customer. And you sit with them, you talk to them, you try to understand why are they asking for what they're asking for. And it'll come down to, well, we sold them a product, and the product needs to have better capabilities. That's all it is, right? You are selling them a product. They are buying a product. So I think the conscious decision that people make, and I think it's actually, you just have another customer base to deal with. Now, that customer base has indirect influence on the way you operate your business. But I think it's a very meritocratic and capitalistic system. I think if we do a good job, then you become a large company. Otherwise, you get acquired. You become a part of another operating system.
Great. Oh, Monish is dying to ask a question there. So the question is trade-off between cost and performance. How do you decide?
Yeah. But then the Concorde example is a little, I would say, contrived because there were many other issues that happened. First of all, the flatbeds came. And when the flatbeds came, people realized that they're willing to spend 10 hours from London to, let's say, California. And the per unit cost never added up because the jet fuel and if you look at the jet engine structure of the Concorde, it was very different. Overall, it could just not have done a good job of the economics on a per user basis. Business users were willing to go on a flatbed, take 4 more hours. And so many other things were true about Concorde. But in this case, I think 5G to me is more like, if you build a faster network, apps build on top of it. And Bill Gates, I'm sure all of you remember this, 640 KB is all people would ever need. And you know what happened, as you gave more DRAM, apps became more and more intelligent. So I think 5G is like that thing where you just give more DRAM and people, more CPU, more DRAM, more virtualization, virtualization brought a lot of efficiencies. And server vendors were worried about selling less servers. They sold more servers because humans did more. People just did more in those 10 hours of their work. So I think 5G, I believe, now the question is it 3 years or 5 years? It's going to create a glut, and the glut helps. Look, the cable companies in the last 15, 20 years, by building these transcontinental cables, they created a ton of glut. And it's helped. I think overall, what we've done with the internet around the world, today nobody talks about choke points and such because of the glut. So I think 5G will be like that. Now the question of performance versus cost, there is definitely a point of asymptotic returns, but that's totally up to the business to figure out, is it an asymptote or is it really still you can get more out of this? And then, is it like this or is it like this is totally up to the business actually. I think in products, we do it right to a certain point, and then we said, look, don't make this a religion. There's another architecture that can do this faster, better. So even though we are known as a company to bring applications and data close, we cheat a lot. Like you wouldn't know this, but we actually have customers who actually run data away from applications because that's the only way for them to scale capacity and performance independent of each other. And that's the only thing that's a constant in business. You don't have religion. The only religion is money. So whatever it takes to get there without being too pedantic about it is probably the important thing actually.
What do the customers think on the headwinds and the tailwinds, right?
Yeah. If I knew that, then I'd be a trillionaire, actually. But how should I answer this question? I think what we all need to embrace is optionality. And the optionality of what if the climate changes abruptly? Are you built for that or not, to really take care of that? And have you learned lessons from 2000 and 2008 and things like that? I think that's all we can do as business people. These are black swan moments. Nobody understands recessions. There's all sorts of theories about whether we are in this micro recession world where there'll never be a mega one again or not. Who knows? 16 was one such thing. Many people didn't realize that 16 was a year of recession, where manufacturing almost came to a halt in the US, and we saw corrections in the stock market and things like that as well. So without really going in, it's perilous to predict these black swan things too. There's a reason why they're called black swans. I think we just have to be prepared for an eventuality and make sure that we don't get carried away. Other than that, I don't think we spend a lot of time. There's economists who can't predict this. We look at the inverted curve and stuff like that. Nobody knows what that means actually, But definitely from what we hear, large customers, we are in such a small sort of, look, we're only $1 billion, $2 billion of spend in software. The companies that really sort of see that macro is those who are doing 50 to 100. And even for those, the ones who are doing well, they don't talk about it. They're like, look, what can we do? If it comes, then we just have to be prepared for it, actually.
So to that question, though, do you have processes in place where if something like that, you get a sense of it, how fast do you, as a public company, how fast do you need to react to something like that happening?
By the time you react to it, it's already late.
Correct.
So right. I think the best you can do is, really the models that you run and stuff like that are aware of some of these, things happening or not. We all know the world is due for one. It's been 11 years, 10 years actually, and at the same time, many a time you just have to go and be reactive, where you have optionality, you understand how do you really do fewer experiments, and how do you really go back to richer customers and do more with them rather than being in this land grab mode and things like that. We will have to make those calls as such things actually happen. We have, the good thing is we're pretty diverse in terms of our overall market exposure, federal versus enterprise versus commercial. And many a time these things actually hit one segment, not the other two actually. So depending on where it hits, with the commercial space still actually spends, because they don't do large spends actually. So being diverse, being diversified is actually equally important in the business too.
Right.
Actually.
Very cool.
If you could go back in history and change 3 things or fix 3 mistakes, what would they be?
At the highest level, if you had said one, I would have attempted to answer that. Please. Well, so let me put it this way. I think in the abstract, I don't think we should look back, because to me, it's sort of brooding on things that you can't really change or couldn't have done much about. And many a time you basically are reacting to events as well. So, but what lessons do I take is like, do we evolve from there? Do we learn from it? Do we not commit the same mistakes again? It's probably the important way of thinking about it. And there'll be further things along the way. It's like a child falls and the child rises and learns to walk and then run, and then over time. So it's very similar to life actually. I think companies are like that. And I think for me, what I keep in mind is, are we committing the same mistake again? And if we can just keep that in mind, then we're probably a better company actually.
So what mistake should I not commit in my company?
The thing is that if you're an infant, you will have to fall. Okay. But let me put it this way. I think if I were to think about one thing, and again, even there, I don't, again, because I've not thought about it, that way actually. I'm like, look, this is just part and parcel of building a business. So there's no such thing as, oh, I could have bypassed a mistake actually, But, honestly, I can't think of any one that basically could have changed the course of this company. It's basically, you have to walk on fire. You can't avoid the fire.
Thank you.
How you react to it.
You've said it before, right? Mistakes are going to make you more anti-fragile.
Yeah.
Right?
You need to learn and be better with it. Because how else do you get better? Other than to, and the kind of things that you learn from others, like experiences of others, is to read and see what they went through. And the thing is that you will realize, and we all go through this, and I'm sure all of us go through this, like, I'm not that. Right? It's like you're going on a highway, how the cop is actually citing someone. I'm not the one who's going to get cited. And you will get cited when you're speeding. Right? So I think it's one of those things where you just have to realize that these things are part of the course. You learn as part of the journey. As long as we just create enough muscle memory to not commit the same mistakes again, actually.
Well, we are running out of time, so just one last question.
So, talk a little bit about the paradigm shifts that you've seen and that have helped you. And the next paradigm shift, you're just waiting for it to happen.
So some things are constant, by the way. I can tell you that some of the tenets of your business, any of our businesses, when it comes to, like, our mission, actually, our vision and mission is timeless. Our vision is very cleverly something that will never change. It's make computing invisible. Right? So what does invisible mean? Like, well, let's go figure what invisible means. And then in the mission, the word frictionless is there. And, again, you've got to keep making things more and more frictionless. And you've got to figure out what the word experience means, because we have a word called experience there too. Platform, we have a word called platform. We'll never be a platform company. We can always strive to get there, which means, can people use multiple things from us, and can these things be better integrated for a frictionless experience? So you deliberately have these kind of things in your vision and mission to really just have it be timeless. The paradigm shifts that happen are more the fashion stuff, like, okay, the fashion of NoSQL, the fashion of SQL, the fashion of event-driven coding versus, stack-based programming. All these things are fashions. The question is what's underlying them. Things like reliability and consistency and performance and availability, these things are not going away anywhere. And that's what the enterprise wants. All the itties you can think of, they're not going away anywhere. Whether it's this paradigm or that paradigm, they look for availability, reliability, performance, consistency, serviceability, and things like that. So we try to make money on those things. Like we are going to make money on containers, and people would know that, wow, this company actually went from VMs to doing containers. We'll have to go make money in the public cloud. It's just a platform. You got to figure out the app. Now, how do you think hard about, like what does it mean to go and burn somebody's Azure credits? You got to figure it out. Like, what's the value of the tether? What's the value of the drag and drop? What's the value of providing a single pane of glass that can withstand the location of where computing is? Those are the kind of things that you have to constantly think about. So as paradigm shift, you have to figure out, okay, where is my value in that thing? And I think that's a thing that you have to constantly evolve towards. I mean, when we were running on top of VMware, we had to be the best set of apps on top of VMware. When you're running on top of our own hypervisor, we have to be the best. When we were an appliance company, we had to be the best. We got out of the appliance business to running on top of everybody else. We had to be. So I think, those things continue to evolve. Our own paradigm of shipping appliances was important for that sort of decade because people are like, what is web scale? I don't trust you guys. Well, I'm going to give you a white box server. Like, what? I've always bought bezeled and these kind of branded servers and things like that, and you're going to give me something from Taiwan because that's what the cloud guys use. Makes no sense to me because who's going to support it? So we had to do a lot of mundane things to really get it going, and now in the last 2-3 years we've been going towards the new decade, which is like software and location agnosticism, things like that. So that's the paradigm shift. But eventually people pay us because they trust us, they love our products, they're easy to use, they love our customer support, and we avoid waste. So these things are timeless, actually.
Great. So keep reinventing yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dheeraj.
Thanks
This
so
was
much.
a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.